Good morning. We are still in the Alter Shulchan Aruch, chapter 471, Taf Ayin Aleph, the laws of what one may eat and may not eat on Erev Pesach. So, to give a little visual, let's make a curve. Let's make a curve, like a two-axis, right? Graph. So on the vertical axis, let's say we have time of day, and then on the horizontal axis, we have type of bread. Yeah. So on the vertical axis, you have 3 times: until the 5th hour from sunrise, until the 9th hour, and then till the Seder night. So 3 time periods in a day. And in this way, you have chametz, you have rich matzah, that is to say matzah that isn't just purely flour and water, but also has.
Shouldn't the time level be set? You're going to look for different times and then you'll see.
Right, so vertical. Oh, you do this way. Yeah. And then, and then you have bread, full on chametz. You have rich matzah. That is to say, matzah isn't purely flour and water. It also has egg, oil, and water, juice, whatever. And then you have actual matzah. Okay. So starting from the far right, going inward, matzah is forbidden all day. Yeah, so it's forbidden all the way up the vertical axis. It's completely forbidden because it's matzah. One may not eat matzah on Erev Pesach. The expression is, it's like being with one's fiance before you seal the deal with marriage.
You're celebrating before the fact.
Exactly, you're celebrating before the fact. That's a good way of putting it. Okay, so the whole day is gone. Good, done. That's out. Rich matzah, right? That matzah, one cannot fulfill their obligation at the Seder night, because the Seder has to be poor man's bread. This is rich bread. It's got other ingredients. Poor man's bread is flour, water, tasteless. But if it's got other ingredients, it's no longer eligible for the Seder night. And therefore, it's not forbidden as the poor man's bread, forbidden all day. So it is permitted, certainly the morning, but all the way up to the 9th hour. Because at the 9th hour, you have to stop eating that rich man's matzah because you need to build an appetite for the Seder. Beginning of the 10th hour, right? 9 hours, that's right. Beginning of the 10th hour, which is 9 hours from sunrise. Yeah. So now the reason why you're stopping to eat then is not because it's a matzah, it's because you're not supposed to make yourself full. Make sure you have an appetite. Yeah. Which means, staying on that logic, on that line, above the 9 hours, so the 10th hour and onward, you can have snacks because it's going to open your appetite. It's not going to ruin your appetite. Don't stuff yourself, but you can eat something that isn't bread. Moving over to the left, your chametz, that is only permitted in the first segment of the vertical axis, the first segment of the day, only up until the 5th hour. After the 5th hour, it's forbidden to eat chametz, because once the time for the Pesach offering is in effect, Torah says you may not slaughter your Pesach offering while you still own chametz, so you can't earn chametz already from them. So those are our 3 lines. Yeah, clear? There's a little visual.
But instead of the bread in the morning, you can still eat the egg matzah.
Right, so the egg matzah can go from the morning all the way up until 9 hours.
Right.
Because once 9 hours hits, now you can't eat anymore because you have to build an appetite as per our Gemara.
Right.
Right. So the bottom line, on the bottom third, you have 2 checks. You can eat chametz and you can eat rich matzah. In the second third, you have 1 check only on the rich matzah. And at the top, you can't eat any of the breads. And all the way on the right, the matzah is X on all 3, because you can't have matzah the entire day of Pesach. Yeah. Okay. That makes a little visual, makes it clear. So this is important because what we're about to do is we're about to discuss cases in which we're not sure which category to put the bread in. Right? Making a balance between 3 different lines gives us more stringencies because you have to treat it in all the prohibitions. So let's see. Halacha Zayin, Halacha 7. Matzah kfula or nefucha. If matzah was folded over, so it was baked, but I got a fold, right? Nefucha, and it's swollen. The matzah is puffed up, so there's like maybe a pocket in the middle. The matzah, let's say like a pita style.
Right.
Yeah. So then, Shinizbar b'simin taf samach aleph. It's been explained already in chapter 461. We're reading 471. So this is 10 chapters ago. There it has been explained. We don't allow you to eat that matzah on Pesach. In general on Pesach. Why? Maybe it became chametz. Right? You folded matzah. So the matzah stops rising once it's fully baked. But maybe it's not fully baked because it's a fold.
Right.
And therefore, we say don't eat it on Pesach. Okay. So if it's a maybe chametz, looking at our axis, you certainly cannot eat it after the 5th hour because maybe it's chametz. Okay. But what about eating it before the 5th hour?
That's what I don't understand.
Sorry?
That I don't understand.
Why it's forbidden?
Right.
Oh, sorry? What do you say?
No, I was just thinking, well, it's just treated like any other bread, but this is matzah.
Nonetheless, it's still forbidden to eat it before the 5th. Because we should be concerned, maybe it didn't become chametz. It's perfect matzah and it belongs all the way in the right vertical. And therefore you cannot eat it on Erev Pesach. So you certainly can't eat after the 5th hour because maybe it's chametz, but you can't eat before the 5th hour because maybe it's matzah on the other side.
Could be either.
Could be either. Therefore forbidden the entire day.
Is there a distinction between matzah and I'm formulate a question? Like they make matzah that's not within 18 minutes.
Yeah. Oh, like the matzah. That's
Like
just,
it says not for Passover use.
yeah, that's just matzah flavored crackers.
Oh,
It's crackers that they're calling matzah.
Crackers?
They're crackers.
It's not matzah.
Oh, you can call matzah. What's the definition of matzah? Flatbread. Good, so it's flatbread. The fact that they call it matzah for promotional purposes doesn't give it a halachic designation. It's chametz. Yeah, it's a cracker.
Okay, I guess you can't have.
Or it's a flatbread. I don't know. Call it what you want.
That's you can't call something matzah if it has chametz.
I mean, you can give it whatever label you want, but it's still going to be chametz.
So then,
Right. So let's assume, for the sake of clarity, it's not matzah.
Okay.
Because we're going to say matzah is considered only non-chametz bread.
Okay.
This is going to be flatbread. We'll call it flatbread instead.
That's what I was always saying, that the matzah that's not marked for Passover shouldn't be called matzah.
Yeah, you're 100% right. It's false marketing.
It's false marketing.
We call it flatbread.
And
but they see it's whatever. It's clever marketing because you have Jews out there who love matzah.
Yeah.
So they don't want to get it all year.
Some don't know the difference.
Yeah, we'll leave it alone
Matzah
for now.
matzah. That's why I always thought that the rabbis just before Pesach should explain this to the people.
It's explained 1,000 times.
Yeah.
Yeah. The question is, if the people that need to hear it are listening. Anyway, let's not go there. Okay, Ches. So that was the first category where it belongs in 2 categories because we're not sure and therefore takes the stringencies of both. Right? You cannot eat it on Pesach because maybe it's matzah. Maybe it's chametz, I'm sorry. And you cannot eat it on Erev Pesach because maybe it's matzah. The folded matzah. Because you're not sure what's happening in the middle there. Is it chametz or not?
Is it matzah or is it
chametz? Or is it flatbread? Okay. So Ches. Now another case. Matzah shenefes ketikuna. Matzah was baked properly. Full, good matzah. Kosher for Pesach. Flour, water. Poor man's matzah. Which means it's eligible for the Seder night to fulfill your obligation. Now, afterwards, nisparira is broken into pieces, and it was done so, but bein b'mayim, placed in water, bein b'shar mashkin, or any other liquid, Umei peres, including the fruit juices, we're calling mei peres. Then is bashla. Now it's been cooked. So I boiled broken pieces of matzah.
Like a barful, right?
Something like that, yeah, let's say. Or maybe it's like croutons.
But it's been boiled.
Yeah, well, you boil croutons in soup, let's say.
Yeah.
Something like that. Now, is this which category of these would you put it into? Would you put it into the matzah category because that's how it was baked? Would you put it into the rich matzah category because I just rebaked it with oil and juice or water? So he explains. Now, afal prisha prusas kayomis, even though the pieces are still identifiable, right? You can see a big piece there. Be'inyan, to the degree to the degree that you would make hamotzi and do full benching, right? So it's not for now, but the halachas of this are very involved. When you have bread, whatever the bread is, matzah or chametz, either way, so it's hamotzi, but then you break it up and recook it. Does it retain its hamotzi status, or did your breaking it up and cooking it ruin it and take it down to mizonos?
Yeah.
Well, it depends on what size it is, and depends on whether you can look at it and identify bread. If I blended it into a I don't know, vegetable soup, let's say, you look at the soup and you just see one blend, you can't identify any pieces of. Then it's one thing. But what if the pieces they're big chunks and they're just kind of floating around on top of your soup, like you have like people put matzah brei into their soup or something like that. Yeah. So in that case, it would retain its status of being hamotzi, even though it's been soaked and been recooked. But you can still look at it. There's a piece of bread, and it's big enough to make a kazayas, whatever the amount is, and you would do full benching afterwards, right? So, therefore, says Alter, nonetheless. Now, you would think if it retains its status of motzi, maybe it retains its status of matzah, and therefore it's forbidden all day in the right vertical. Yeah. Nonetheless, it may be eaten on Erev Pesach, before the 10th hour. So it's in the middle vertical. It's in the rich matzah vertical.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Because even though it retains its status as bread, you could not fulfill your matzah obligation with that matzah.
Because it's taken on characteristics of richness.
Commotion is barbarism and Tov Samach Aleph is explained in chapter 461, where there it says, where's the footnote? As Alter states in that source, cooking nullifies the flavor of matzah. Right? You have to have poor man's bread. You got to taste that poor man element. When you cook it, you lost the flavor. So even though it retains its status as bread, it lost its status as kosher matzah for the Seder night. And because it lost its status for kosher matzah on the Seder night, therefore it goes from category on the right side where it's forbidden all day and moves over one to the left into the rich matzah, and you're allowed to eat it up until the 9th hour. 10th hour. After the 10th hour, you can't eat it because it's bread that you're not allowed to eat because you're going to ruin your appetite.
Right.
But because you can't fulfill your obligation, therefore it's not forbidden all day.
Mm-hmm.
Clear?
So, in other words, it's not the reason is not because it absorbed richness from whatever it was cooking at. In other words, if you just took that same scenario but not boiled it in soup, but you just boiled it in water, and let's say
he said water. He mentioned water. Yeah,
I did. Okay, so it was just water that nullified the taste of the matzah.
That's right.
That would be enough.
That would be enough to move it over to the other category.
That's
right. That's right. So in Chabad we wouldn't do that because we don't have wet matzah.
No, you don't.
But other communities can certainly do that if they'd like.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure many do actually. I'm sure many on Erev Pesach take matzah, break it up, and boil it and whatever, and have a nice lunch. Right, as long as it's before the beginning of the 10th hour, right? Okay. Now, next paragraph in Halacha 8. Then eina prusas kayamos. If the pieces are no longer identifiable, they're not there anymore. The Hainu, this means to say, she'ein mehem kazayas. There's no longer a olive size in any of the pieces, so it's been broken up too small. Now, consequently, it's been degraded from its hamotzi status. The Indian shemavachim alim b'armin azonos main shalish. So now, instead of making hamotzi, you'd now be making mizonos and the alamichya, the smaller benching, not the full benching, because this bread which was matzah bread, is now broken up. And so classic, again, the halachas of this are very involved, but the classic example would be, this is the thing people do. You take a bread, you flavor it, you bake it, you toast it, and then you cut it up into small little pieces and you make them into croutons, right? So if they're small enough, it loses its hamotzi status and it's mazonis now. Especially if those, specifically actually I should say, if those croutons have been baked in a soup. If it's in a salad, it's a different story because you haven't ruined the bread element yet, even though it's very small, because you haven't cooked it. You haven't soaked it or boiled it. Or not bake it, because bake it's something else, but if you cook it or fry it, and you cook it in some liquid.
Make them into
smaller pieces and liquid and put into liquid. So now it's been degraded from a moitzi to mazonis. Okay. So now which of the three categories would it be in? We have to open up a new category.
I think that would be considered like a snack.
Oh, it's snack. We have to open up a new category, which is snack. Therefore, you could even eat them after the 10th hour.
So with this,
because it no longer has the category, it's no longer classified as a bread as far as blessings are concerned, and therefore it's in snack category. And if we can eat it all the way till nightfall.
I was trying to ask this question yesterday.
Yeah.
So with let's say matzah, that egg matzah, it doesn't have the water component, just pure juice.
If we would consider it,
if it's deemed mezon,
that's right.
Then you could.
That's right.
Eat that.
If it's deemed mazonos, you can eat it all the way, all day. You couldn't stuff yourself. You couldn't fill yourself up, as we already classified.
Eat enough mazonas, you fall into the category that's a dish.
Exactly, exactly right.
Yeah, sure.
Exactly. Okay, third paragraph in halacha 8. Matzah shenefes kitzikun. Now again, another case. May you bake matzah properly, normal good matzah, flour, water. Now the achakach afterwards, nisparada afilu leperum dakamoid. It's now been broken up into very fine pieces. Right? So I didn't put it into water. I didn't cook it and soak it. I just broke it up. Even if it's very tiny, you may not eat those bread the entire Erev Pesach. It still has not left the matzah category. It only leaves the matzah category if you soak it or make it or bake or recook it. But because you didn't recook it, even though it's been crumbled up, it still remains in the matzah category, and you may not eat it on Erev Pesach. And you can eat that matzah on the Seder night and fulfill your obligation of matzah. Because it still retains its status as bread as far as everything's concerned, including hamotzi. Because the hamotzi is only downgraded once it gets cooked. Like I was telling you before, if you cut those croutons up, the bread into croutons, and you put it into a salad, it still retains hamotzi. But if you cut those same croutons up and you put it into a hot soup and now it becomes cooked, now it loses hamotzi, it becomes mazonos. Right. So likewise with this matzah bread, you cut it up, you didn't soak it, then it's in the matzah category all the way. No eating on Erev Pesach, and you can eat it on Seder night and eat and fulfill your obligation. Okay, we don't do that because you want to have a whole matzah when you make your okay, it's not shlema, but in theory, you could fulfill your obligation of eating matzah. In fact, actually, a more practical example, and there are people who do this because of their condition. If someone has a hard time chewing, especially with matzah, because it gets spiky and poke if the person lacks teeth, so he takes that shlema, crumbles it up in his bag or in his hand in very small pieces, and eats it because I'm dead. That's it. Okay. Halacha tes. Now, sorry?
Moving right along.
Moving along. Halacha 9. Yeah, halacha 10. Halacha 9, I'm sorry. Yeah. Tes. V'im chazer v'losh es ha'perudim halal b'yayin v'shemen u'shar mashkin me'peres. Now, what happens? Here's a new scenario. So we covered the case where you broke it up and put it into liquids and cooked it as part of a soup or something else. Now we also cover the case where you broke it up and didn't cook it or didn't soak it. Yeah. You just cooked it up. You just broke it up, in which case it retains its bread status. Yeah. Now, new case. You break it up and now you knead it. You knead it again. Losh, you knead it. Knead.
So you make it into flour first.
Kind of, yeah.
You can't knead it.
You need these crumbs. That's the right, yeah.
Yeah, they're like breadcrumbs. And then you add water to it and knead it.
Yeah.
And it's a moitzi.
Sorry?
And it's a moitzi.
Oh, so let's see.
I don't know, because now it doesn't have gluten.
So maybe so maybe it retains its hamotzi because you didn't cook it again. But is it rich matzah or is it poor man's bread?
Depends what you added to it.
Well, I added wine, no water. I added wine, oil, and other liquids. That's what he says here. So is it rich man's matzah or is it poor man's matzah?
Depends if it retained its taste.
So let's see. He's gonna.
Wine has some water.
Huh?
Wine has some water.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. So this is kind of like you turn the matzah into a paste. People do this, for example. People do this, for example, with like
It's all those wine cookies. Lots of wine cookies.
no. Well, let's say, for example,
That's baked again.
it's the kind of mixture you might use. Certain kinds of Chinese chicken where you fry it and it's coated in something.
Batter.
In a batter, but sometimes the batter is not made of flour; it's made of like already cooked bread. So it has like a little crunchy thing to it.
Breadcrumbs.
Breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
But breadcrumbs have been mixed into oil and become like another batter that you layer around something else.
Right,
Let's say,
yeah.
right?
Okay.
So now you haven't cooked it yet, because once you cook it, we already described above, you lost its bread status. Because it's tiny, it's been broken up and lost its bread status.
Oh, so it doesn't have to be liquids per se. It just has to be baked.
In the previous cases,
Yeah.
correct. Well, liquid, yes. Well,
Liquid
no,
could be oil.
no. If you rebaked it without
No, not baked, like fried it.
refried it, exactly. In the previous case, yes.
Yeah. Okay, that would be.
Now in this case, that's correct.
No status.
That's right. If it's small enough,
If it's small enough. Too,
right? If it's not small and you still see big pieces, then it remains hamotzi.
That's right. You need that.
Right.
That's
right. Now, so now here's the case. He now kneaded those breadcrumbs into wine, oil, or any other juice, not water. V'loy bishlan, didn't bake it, light, didn't cook it. V'loy tignan, didn't fry it afterwards. It just left it as that batter. Yeah. So yesh this topic. We're now in a doubt. Imi nikras matzah shira. Is this considered rich matzah? Here are the two sides of the coin. Yesh loymar. One way of thinking about it is, one might say, even because it's already been baked originally in its poor man state, just flour and water. Even though later it's been made rich by being crumbled up and put with wine and water, with wine and oil or whatever. Nonetheless, I can still call it poor bread. It retains its status of poor. Why? Shibishasa nasis, at the time of its making lechem into bread, which is the moment of baking, it was poor. In other words, like this: does something that become poor bread at the moment of baking never, put it this way, which moment defines whether it's poor or rich? The when I have it now, or the moment it becomes bread? The moment this thing became bread, it was poor. Now that I have it, it's rich. So is it poor? Is it rich bread or is it poor bread? On the one hand, the logic is it's poor bread because the moment it became bread, it was poor. Or the other way around. Because now I've been crumbled it up again and re-kneaded it into juice. It's now changed from what it used to be. It lost its original status. The natas matzah shir now becomes rich matzah. In other words, can something change its status? Or the way it is at the moment of baking, that's the way it remains. Or no, I can change it. If I re-knead it, it's new. These are the two sides of the coin.
Why don't they just stick to the original reasoning?
Which is?
Which when we go back to the case of taking pieces of matzah and cooking it and boiling it, and the reason that's not considered spoilage matzah is because it lost its taste as poor man's bread. So here you could say that
it lost its taste as poor man's bread.
Yeah, that was the reasoning behind it.
And we said before that one second, that's a good question. We said before that if it loses the status of poor, if it loses the taste, oh, that's because it was cooked over there. Here it's not cooked. Here the word.
I mean, wouldn't you'd have to taste this back.
So I'll tell you why. I'll tell you what the difference might be. Okay. This is what I'm thinking.
Oh.
When you cook something, even if it's in water, you extract the flavor that it retains.
Sure.
When you mix it with something else, it didn't lose its flavor. It's been overpowered by something else, but it didn't lose its flavor.
Unless it's been there for maybe 24 hours.
Then it's a form of cooking. Then it's a form of cooking.
Right. Okay, we're not talking about that.
No.
This is just,
So but that was a good question.
okay. all right.
So the loss of flavor here is when it inherently loses its flavor, not if it's just overpowered by some other flavor.
Right, so here it didn't, so that wouldn't apply.
That's right.
But if you leave it long enough, it's gonna rise.
I don't think it would. Okay, well, first of all, let's say you didn't.
Because we're saying that even at the matzah, when you're sitting at the Seder table, keep it away from any liquid.
Oh, that's our custom. That's a custom. That's not halacha. Raw halacha is you can mix your matzah with water or wine. There's no difference because the halacha is once it's baked, it doesn't rise again. We are worried that maybe it wasn't baked fully, so we were scared. But the letter of the law is if it's baked, it doesn't rise again. We are just more strict because we're concerned maybe there was a little bit that wasn't baked properly and now it's going to rise again. That's a very far off chance. We're still stringent about it, but still a very far off chance. Okay, so these are the two sides of the coin. When does it get its status? At the moment of baking, and then it stays that way. That's the status it stays. And here, at the moment of baking, it was poor bread, and therefore it stays that way. If that's the case, forbidden all day on Erev Pesach. Or I look at it not at the moment of when it became bread, but how I have it now. And right now, I have it as rich man's bread because I just mixed it again with wine and oil and whatever, juice. So therefore, you have to be stringent in all categories. Number one, don't use that for your Seder night to fulfill your obligation of eating matzah. Why? Because maybe it's actually rich bread.
Yeah, you're not sure.
The gam as well, also keep it on the vertical right axis of not eating on an Erev Pesach because kishema ain't a matzah shita, because maybe it's not rich matzah, maybe it's poor bread, poor matzah.
It's a doubt what it is.
That's right. So it's in
You're
two categories.
on both sides.
Correct. Which actually means we have to add on the vertical axis, we have to add one more, which is the Seder night. Can you fulfill your obligation? Okay.
So it's when in doubt, don't do it.
Well, if no, the doubt is. And the doubt has two categories, and you have to take the stringencies of both categories. So the stringency of the category of rich matzah is that you can't use it for the Seder. But the stringency of poor matzah is that you can't eat it at Pesach, although you could eat it at the Seder.
Right.
In fact, you should. You can fulfill your obligation. In this case, it's the stringency of both. So not eating it at Pesach and also not using it for your Seder. Because you're not sure which one it is. Okay, we'll stop over here. Because the next halacha, we have like two more things to cover, really. Number one is, three. Okay, we'll see. We'll get to tomorrow, essentially, is, first of all, what about children? Do I have to stop my children from eating matzah on their Pesach? Do I have to stop them from eating rich matzah after the hour? Like all these halachas we've described till now of what we should and shouldn't eat on Erev Pesach, does that apply to children? And at what age do I have to start training them? And then afterwards, you're going to get to other customs of things we don't eat. Customs, not halacha, like the custom not to eat maror on Erev Pesach, not to eat apples and different things like that. We'll get to that. And we'll also get to what happens if someone accidentally did eat. What do they do? We're going to deal with all of this in the coming days. We're making good movement. We're at halacha yud now, and it only goes to Yudalit. So we're doing good.
We'll be ready by the time Pesach comes.
Finishing, I don't know about that. Okay, a wonderful day, Yidden. We should have good news from everyone, everywhere. Mashiach now. It's enough already with all this garbage.
It's